Hello, my name is Bret Rachlin, and welcome again to another edition of Adapt2Changes, our interview series with people who focus, how they've adapted to changes throughout their careers to continue growing. Today, I'm happy to be joined by a longtime friend of mine, Todd Davidson. Hey, Todd.
Afternoon. How are you, Brett?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you doing?
Good. Good.
I really appreciate you taking the time with me today. And I think we'll have a really good conversation, especially since I know a lot about your career and where you've come from and where you're going. First off, just describe for me a little bit about kind of your career evolution. I think specifically, even going back to toward the beginning, I'm curious of how you kind of made that adjustment from packaging to telecom, even though I know you had some telecom experience prior to that, even going back to our days at Vanderbilt. But take me through that a little bit.
Honestly, I think that first job out of college, it was something where I kind of set my sights on, more than anything else, destination cities and looking for a job. And the opportunity in the packaging industry presented itself in a sales role. And, honestly just went with it. And it was one of those things where ultimately after 7 years decided that, is this something I really want to do for the rest of my life? In the simplest way, selling boxes, although it was more than that. And, again, had some experience in the technology industry throughout college and specifically telecom. And, decided that was the direction I wanted to go, take the sales experience and go, more towards the technology side of things.
So when you made that switch, how did you approach sales differently from what you were doing with packaging to telecom? What was the same and what was different, and how did you adjust to those changes?
I think, where I came from was very much, and really going through my first 7 years, having a real good role model, but it was very much relationship oriented. And technically being a 1099 employee, your livelihood depended on that. And that was certainly the focus of the company, and the focus of my leadership was just purely to develop relationships, and the sales would come after that. I mean, it was always one of those things where, my boss would say, if you're not out to lunch with a client, you're not doing your job. And so every month, having to sit in front of him with my American Express statement to review every single customer entertaining that was, event that month, could be stressful at times. Obviously moving over to the telecom arena with some, what you could say larger companies, more structured type, general sales type roles, it was a little bit different. I mean, there was certainly opportunity for initially, learning the products and the portfolio that I was selling, but it was more of a activity-driven sales role initially, coming in at entry level with these companies.
Yeah, so that it sounds like that first role really gave you a good foundation, though, in terms of building up the kind of routine that you need in sales, in terms of creating events so that you have enough interactions that it's going to drive opportunities for you.
Correct. And being 1099, it was one of those things where you don't sell, you don't eat. So, after that, the relationship side of things within sales came easy to me. And certainly the work ethic involved ultimately with generating opportunities.
So obviously, sales has changed a great deal over the past, 25 years, that you and I have been in the working world, and with me coming more from a marketing perspective, but having worked with lots of salespeople and really supporting sales throughout my career, how have you adjusted to, the changes in sales? And I think specifically the fact that buyers have a lot more information today. I mean, it really is a buyer-centric world, and it has been for a while, but it's only getting more so. How have you adjusted to the fact that buyers know more information? Buyers don't have to rely on salespeople to learn about new products and services. How have you effectively adapted to those changes?
Well, I think, some of the sales training that I've had over the last, I'd say 20 years, especially, the last 19 at AT&T, it's kind of taught a different method of sales initially than, compared to what I was brought up with, but it's more about, I think identifying what is the problem that the customer has versus trying to sell a widget. You identify the problem, come up with a solution, and, certainly, explain to the customer how our solution is going to solve their problem. So it's not necessarily selling a product, but rather, solving a problem for them. And of course, the relationship comes along with it, as always.
Yeah. Do you find, one thing that was certainly very common early in my career, and I think this is still the case. I'm curious, do you still find that people want to do business with people they like, and that still wins out a lot? Or has that lessened to a degree, do you think, over time, or is that still really important?
Um, you certainly, I think we're more in a commodity driven environment than we were in years past, but I think ultimately relationship is important, and, the customer knowing that, you're going to work hard for them and that they can depend on you. I mean, if they know every time that they're coming to me, I'm going to get something done for them, that goes a long way. And ultimately, I always used to say when I managed folks, if customers are going to leave us, we want them to hurt or feel bad about leaving us, because not that they're leaving a friend, but they're certainly leaving a trusted advisor or someone who, truly did something good for them.
So with that in mind, a little bit in terms of, sales changing throughout your career, buyers, having more power. Um, what has kept you kind of ahead of your prospects and customers? How do you stay knowledgeable about the issues that are important to them, so that you're able to, keep up with, their needs, and, not only being responsive, but just knowing kind of where things are going? And how do you continuously learn to stay in front of them?
Well, I mean, first off, there is a certain amount of training that goes on a yearly basis that's provided by the company, as well as certain market insights provided by our marketing group. So that's all, I'll call it required learning. And you could certainly, consider that not as important, or you can certainly blow it off. But I think if you want to succeed, it's something that you do want to take seriously and, help further your career. Secondarily, I think just reading market publications, now online, is certainly, provided a tremendous wealth of knowledge compared to, when the internet, when it wasn't readily available, let's say back in the, 90s.
Right, right. Yeah. So,
So,
so what, I mean, what do you attribute that to? Is that something you feel like you were taught, to kind of be, consistently learning, or is that something you just sort of honed over the years, and just you were trained to do it in terms of keeping up with all those new areas of interest, and key things to, just understand about your customers and prospects?
no, I mean, I think it's, to a certain extent taught, and you want to do your research, you want to understand your customer. So it's a certain amount of not only keeping up with industry news, but also keeping up with what your customers are doing and what's going on with them. But, again, there's a certain amount that the marketing group is going to do as far as market sensing, and hopefully, come to the sales organization with certain information, stating that, this is what's important to customers, above and beyond maybe what I've learned from my customers. And, the reality is, if you don't understand, in our case, you don't understand the technology or don't understand the offers, you're going to have a hard time selling, or, ultimately, meeting the customer needs to, solve a problem they have.
Right, right. So one of the roles that you were in, and I don't recall exactly when this was. I mean, I think it's probably in the last 10 to 15 years, but I know you were involved where you were focused more on kind of retaining, customers, versus, upselling them on terms of new technology.
Right.
Okay. So that's really, I find that just really interesting, because so much of sales is actually helping people manage themselves through change, and getting them to think about how they're going to upgrade or do something new, which can be challenging because people often don't want to change. You had sort of the reverse of that for a little while. How did you communicate, the value of what you were selling, in terms of kind of trying to retain customers who may have be, inundated from others about why they should be changing to other things, or doing something new, versus, remaining with your company?
Well, I think, first of all, when you have that, and in this case, it was a dual inside outside sales model. So you had sales professionals that were, paired with one another, tied at the hip, an inside, account executive as well as an outside account executive. So I managed that inside team. So, day-to-day life cycle work, that inside account executive and primary responsibility from a compensation standpoint was retention. Their responsibility was to be that day-to-day contact for the customer. Customer had any issues whatsoever, that was that first call was made to this inside AE. Certainly the outside account executive developed the relationship as well with the client, but their focus was, acquisition of new business. More often than not, these inside account executives built that relationship and that rapport with the customer, where a lot of times they were identifying those new opportunities initially. And then it became, a true team effort where, of course, they would engage their outside partner. But, really it's the work that you did managing the existing book of business that ultimately helped solidify that relationship with the client and give you that opportunity to bid on that new business. Or, certainly over time you've had that, you've had that opportunity to understand the customer's business, what their needs are, and a lot of times the first to hear about when they had an issue or a problem to solve.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about some of those things around. I mean, what you were really talking about was kind of how your target buyers buy, and I contend that that's one of the elements in terms of really helping to adapt to changes, is having buyers are changing, and having your finger on the pulse of who they are, and not only how they're changing, but what how are they buying? I mean, how are those buying decisions being made, and how that's different. I mean, obviously you've been part of this whole swing from traditional kind of perpetual license from a software perspective to software as a service or a subscription model,
Right.
and things like that. So things are taken out from a an operational budget versus a capital budget. Um, how do you feel you've kind of stayed on top of your buyers and understanding the changes that they're going through? I mean, how do you is it just talking to them, or what tools have you used to kind of keep up with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as you're going to have day to day that relationship with certain folks, and maybe up the leadership chain within that customer. It may only be once a month, or let's say quarterly slash annual stewardship type calls, where you're kind of reviewing the state of the business and what's gone on as far as with the services that we currently contract with them. But ultimately it's just staying in front of them constantly, understanding what their business is. When you talk about the quarterly or annually reviews, understanding what their goals as a corporation are for the coming year, not just the corporation itself, but of course their IT division in the case of technology. um,
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about staying in front of them, that's another case where that continuous learning really comes in handy, because the more that you're learning, the more interesting things you're uncovering that you can share with your customers, just to stay in front of them.
right.
And create. A salesperson I worked with many years ago used to talk about sales as a series of creating events, and being able to showcase things throughout the relationship, whether it's a new customer or a long time existing customer. But those are great ways to kind of stay in front of them. And I think today, especially given the fact that we're now all kind of working remotely, it's so important, because you can't just hop in at their office at
Right.
times like we kind of used to do back in even well before COVID. Things were far less remote anyway, but it's nice to be able to pop off an email or share a message with something interesting that will say, hey, here's a reason to talk.
No, that's it. And it's again, we'd come out with some new offer, you know, hey, Mr. Customer, thought you may be interested in this. I know we talked about this 6 months ago. What do you think? Certainly had plenty of opportunities for, events like that. Um, and I
So
think, go
go
ahead.
ahead. So I know you've also led a lot of team members over the years. How have you incorporated things that you've done to kind of evolve your career and adapt to changes with your team. How did and I think that you've worked with lots of different people, just like I have, and everyone's different, and people have different strengths and weaknesses. How have you been successful getting them to kind of adopt certain practices to help them also adapt to changes?
I certainly don't profess to be, Superman salesperson, but, I guess what I do, you take from your own experience and where you've been successful and kind of impart those words on your team. You certainly want to identify where their motivations are. And of course, kind of just, understand where they have, let's say struggles in what they do. And you could certainly learn from your team as well, as far as to be able to then promote that shared knowledge amongst the team. So that, that's, I guess, primarily how I've looked at it. Certainly I'm always the type to, again, make sure it's not just about selling, but there's a lot more to it. In other words, you want to be an educated seller. I think you want to be an organized seller, especially with, working for such a large corporation and everything involved with, managing a book of business and all the products and services we have.
So I'm curious, because you mentioned struggles, and that's something that really fascinates me, because I think that everybody struggles throughout their career, and we have team members that are struggling at different times. And I think that you can, when you are struggling, you can either use those struggles and be resilient and really move forward from those struggles and really learn from them. I mean, sometimes others, though, really fall apart from those struggles, and it's hard to recover, or it's not that they don't recover. It's just that I think that they get stagnant, maybe even in their careers. Do you have any examples, either for yourself or your team members, where, maybe there was some struggles going on, and you saw that they could either play to their strengths or overcome those struggles, and that made them, kind of a better salesperson or a better team member ultimately?
Yeah, I think it comes down to ultimately, going back to, what is their motivation, or in the case of, my personal experience, what has been my motivation? A lot of times when you're presented with obstacles or bumps in the road, so to speak, it comes down to, ultimately, what do you need to do? I mean, in a lot of cases, success, it's not a choice when, you have a mortgage, you have a wife, you have kids to put through college. There's no other alternative other than making your number and succeeding. I've always, in some respects, and even, with personal things that go on, whether it be working out or weight loss, everything, I like the gamification aspect of things. So it's not just about making money. It's just not about making your number in sales, but again, where do you fall on that leaderboard? Not just competing with yourself, but competing with others as well.
Well, I mean that, I think that's a great answer, Todd. And I think that what's really, to me, part of what you talked about is around focus and motivation. So it's that we are all going to have tough times. We're all going to have challenges, and but keeping what's important top of mind to help get through those situations keeps us, focused, and being able to, deal with the change, so that we say, this change is not going to kill us, or it's not going to put us down. If it does, it's not going to put us down for long, because we need to stay in the game and keep playing. To your point about gamification, where, it's about focusing on what's important and making sure that, we're still, meeting or exceeding our objectives, because that's how you move forward in life.
Right. And there were certainly times where I've had, folks on my team that, let's say it just wasn't working out, and, I felt, but let them come to the realization that maybe it wasn't the right spot for them. Initially we were working up market with much larger companies. It's a lot more than just going out and knocking on doors and selling. You had to manage this base of accounts. And, again, if it was someone who maybe wasn't the most organized person and not taking care of the day to day, maybe they were better suited to, work down market with, let's say, some smaller companies in more of an acquisition role, where they're purely just selling. And then after that, they don't have to worry about, managing a multi-million-dollar account day to day.
Well, I think that's right on, especially with the fact where we talked a little bit earlier about playing to your strengths versus weaknesses. Especially when you have a team, sometimes if you have team members who have certain challenges, making sure you're putting them in a position to succeed, is important. And someone can be a great contributor and have a successful career, especially playing to their strengths. That's not to mean that they can't improve their weaknesses. And it doesn't mean they're not adapting to changes, but you're going to be able to better adapt to changes if you are coming at it from a position of strength. Because you don't want to have too much negativity on you. If you're trying to adapt to a change and you're in your weakness area, that's a lot to overcome.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think a lot of people miss that. I think that there's been times, I remember early in my career where I had people I was working for who put more emphasis on areas that I needed to work on than they probably should have, rather than seeking more of a balance between those and the things that I was good at, and giving some of that balance, because I clearly wasn't in the wrong role for what my skill set was, but it could have easily gone the other way if I couldn't succeed. And it's hard when you're only working on things that are challenging for you. You have to have that balance a little bit, or it is the wrong role for you.
Right. Well, and that's certainly something, I would say, 4 years ago or so, and obviously being with the company for such a long time, mostly in a sales role, both individual contributor and manager, as well as a technical overlay the last couple of years. I was really, had a chance to look at a lot of different roles internally, and targeted one specific role that took me about 2 years to get, only because it was somewhat coveted and no one ever left. And that really was something that I was able to evaluate my strengths and ultimately what I wanted to do, and thought the opportunity was perfect for me, really combining not only sales and the technology aspect of things, but also the operational aspects and program management, to where now I'm still working with sales teams, but more as, a solution architect, combining AT&T core services with third-party vendor services as an integrator, and putting together these solutions, for the account team to present to their clients. So it's been, a unique opportunity.
Well, and also it sounds like and I'm really happy for you that has been a really cool opportunity for you. But it also sounds like you've gotten to a situation where the business world and your customers have changed, kind of requiring those kinds of integrated solutions, but that it just happens to also align with your skill set in terms of being able to put together disparate functionality across different things to form those solutions and then execute that for the customer. And recognizing that, and that is really playing to your strengths. So no wonder this is a much more satisfying role for you,
Right.
in terms of where you are now, from that standpoint.
Well, and honestly, you don't, still get to work and impart my wisdom on the sales teams, but, you of course don't have the added headache of actually managing them, which I'm sure some folks can relate to.
No, absolutely. And that's sales, sales is one of those jobs where it's a, what have you done for me lately? I mean, there is, that's where it is.
Right.
And it's that can be relentless.
Absolutely. The great feeling the end of the month, but the next day it's all new game.
Yeah. A clean slate.
Right.
I worked with somebody who always talked about that he had a lot of salespeople who worked for him. And he said his favorite salespeople were always the ones who wanted another boat, because if they wanted another boat, that meant they were hungry. And you can't coach someone who's satisfied or not hungry.
Right. Exactly. Well, and that was, obviously being, first out of college, being a 1099, they gave you enough draw just to keep you fed slightly. But
Right.
That was about it. Other than that, you needed to sell.
So in thinking about, other people, especially, sales and marketing people who are under constant change. I mean, the marketing world with technology is changing so rapidly. There's always new tools to use. Sales as well. Yeah, I think starting out now as a sales development rep is, usually a 6-month job, and you either succeed and move up or you are out. And a lot of sales development reps, your calls are being recorded. There's a lot more intelligence in terms about what you're doing and what type of oversight is going on. What type of counsel do you have for people who are either starting out in sales or longtime salespeople in terms of how to navigate through those changes and just keep their eye on the ball to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the last 20, 30 years, the environment has changed dramatically, and I think even a large old company such as mine has taken a lot of let's say taken a lot of recent ideas from the software companies, the high tech companies out of Silicon Valley recently, as far as that SDR model. I think and I'm not too familiar with that per se, because that's something certainly I think that our company's now starting to adopt more and more with recent graduates out of our college hire program and down down market and small business to start them out. But I think it again, in sales, it's a matter of number of at bats, and the more attempts you make, the more deals you're going to close. If you're going to have it's like baseball, a batting average of 300 is great. So, and you can even in the SDR world, the programs now are such that ultimately how many calls you need to make in order to close this amount of business in order to meet your quota. It's that scientific now as far as the analytics of it all, really. And I think that as far as just working hard, and of course making sure you take time to either talk with or look over the shoulder of someone who has been successful in the role, I think helps a lot as well.
No, I think that's great wisdom, Todd. And I really, and just sort of summing up, this conversation and kind of key takeaways. I think the thing that you talked about earlier, which really kind of wraps this, sort of everything you were talking about all together, this idea that when you are kind of struggling or there is a change that you have to deal with, being able to reframe and focus on what's important, what's going to keep you motivated, so you can move forward and overcome that obstacle, I think is something to really keep in mind. And a lot of that actually relates back to kind of how buyers buy, but more so like yourself, how you yourself buy. Because if you know yourself, you have to understand what motivates you. And if you can understand that, then I think that when you are going through a challenging time, or you are faced with something new, where I have to change the way I'm doing my job because of new technology or the way buyers are buying for you, that you can get through a little bit more if you know that keeping your eye on the goal and focusing there and knowing that you're going to have to adapt, or it's just not going to work out for you. And that's
right.
My motivation.
Absolutely. And I always had that when we had desks in an office, that Wayne Gretzky quote, you miss 100 shots, 100% of the shots you never take. So kind of take that to heart, obviously, in the sales environment.
Absolutely. And the other great Gretzky quote is also, you skate to where the puck is going.
Correct.
And that really aligns well with the idea that things are going to change, and you've got to be prepared to be able to navigate those changes to be successful. And that's where the continuous learning comes in. I think that you can prepare for changes. You can prepare yourself mentally and practice by continuously learning, by thinking about where things are going, so you're not surprised and shocked into a situation of negativity and like, oh no, what am I going to do?
Right. And I think it's both. I think, with my experience, it's not only a function of, marketing, but your personal responsibility as well, to make sure that, you have that knowledge base and kind of staying ahead of the game to help you out.
Definitely. All right, Todd. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for taking the time with me today.
Great. Enjoyed it, Brett. Thanks.
Well, once again, this is another edition of the Adapt2Changes series on understanding how professionals, focus in their careers and really succeed in adapting to changes. Until next time, this is Bret Rachlin, and thanks again to Todd Davidson.